So my name is Paul Tuttle. I am a senior technology consultant with Warwick. Just want to say real quickly, my role within Warwick is to work with businesses, nonprofit organizations, and we have school systems, a number of other types of organizations where we provide managed IT services, essentially taking over comprehensive responsibility for IT operations within those organizations, and also augment existing IT staff. And so my role is to form partnerships with these organizations to help maximize their IT ops, create a more efficient, cost-effective way to handle the IT operations. We also have a number of other sort of ancillary services, IT business continuity plans for organizations that are looking to have a fallback plan should anything happen to the IT management that they have in place. So those are some of the types of services that we provide. I want to introduce John Hyman, who is a partner at Myers Roman. John's expertise is in the area of human resources, employment agreements, disciplinary action, including terminations. He's all about the whole area of human resources, policy and procedure, compliance with those organizations that are within a regulatory environment. And it goes back to what Ryan was just saying. You can have all the infrastructure in place, you can have the processes in place, but the statistics tell us that breaches come more often than not from people. And if you don't have the appropriate policies, procedures, and training in place, you're doomed from the start. So I want to turn it over to John, and we look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you to Warwick for hosting, and particularly for the invite to have me here today to share with you all what to me is maybe the easiest but the most important thing to do in making sure that your organization is cyber compliant, which is creating a cyber secure culture within your organization. And we're going to approach this from two different aspects. We're going to approach it from, number one, what do you do with your folks? Because as it's been said a couple times already this morning, the most likely cause of a breach is going to come not from your technology, not from your hard systems, but from your soft systems. That is, the people that interact with those systems on a daily basis. And then number two, so that's area number one. And then number two, what do you do then from a planning standpoint, both before and after a breach, to put yourself in the best position to react and respond to that breach? We need to understand that if you take only one thing away from everything you hear this morning, what you should take away is that a cybersecurity event, a data breach, is not an if issue, but a when issue. Everyone sitting in this room is not only at risk for a breach, but will likely be breached at some point, right? It's not an if, but a when. And when you recognize that it's not an if proposition, but a when proposition, you start to understand the importance of putting yourself in the best position to mitigate that risk both before it happens and then after it happens. The average cost of a data breach, when we start to understand that it's not an if but a when, the average cost to an organization that's breached to respond to and remedy that breach is $4 million. Now, that number is going to vary by how large your organization is, how many pieces of data are exposed or are stolen. So the number is going to vary. So this is a big picture, very average number. But when we say this is what it costs to remedy, to respond to and remedy a data breach, number one, we can see this is a 2017 number. There's no data yet for 2018. Up 29% since 2013. So in 4 years, it's increased 29%. So the cost is not decreasing, it's increasing, number one. And number two, this cost, we're not just talking about the securing our systems cost and the technology cost of the breach, but we're talking about notification to people that have had information stolen as a result of the breach. We're talking about downtime responding to or remedying the breach. We're talking about reputational harm suffered as a result of the breach. Does anybody feel comfortable with Equifax holding on to your information today? Right, the reputational harm that goes along with that data breach. And so when we start to understand the cost that's involved with responding to the breach, and that the number one cause by far of data breach incidents occurring is employee error, we start to kind of put a picture together of, okay, what can we do to put ourselves in a position we're not going to stop every breach from happening, but to at least put ourselves in a position to kick the can down the road, to deploy our employees to be our best line of defense. If we understand that employee error, we're not talking about the North Korean kid sitting in a hovel trying to hack into your system through a brute force attack. We're talking about the employee that doesn't understand, and we're going to talk about all of these in some depth, doesn't understand the dangers that go along with unsecured or open Wi-Fi networks, or proper password security, or what to do if a device is lost or stolen. The harm that your employees can cause, not through malice, right, but just through ignorance. Okay, they just don't know any better. And to give employees the tools, okay, to be your first and best line of defense, because if employee error is the number one cause, that's where we should be allocating the bulk of our dollars from a cyber compliance standpoint. It's training, it's policies, it's making sure our employees are properly educated and have the proper tools to understand what they can do to help secure your environments from the bad guys that are out there trying to access your information. And it starts as simple as making sure your employees understand what security procedures you have in place for your systems, right? From a technology standpoint, right, it's things like firewalls, making sure data is encrypted. That's technology, that's security. From an employee standpoint, do your employees understand the importance of making sure that their mobile devices are password protected? Do you require that their mobile devices be password protected? Do you require that their desktops or laptops or whatever they're using to access your environment, access your data, have sufficient security protocols implemented on them so that if a device is lost or stolen, or if a vendor comes into your environment, or a cleaning person or whomever, that device is going to be locked down and not be able to be accessed. Do you have reasonable password protocols in place to make your passwords as secure as possible? I find this data to be fascinating, how long it takes somebody to crack a password. 7 lowercase letters. It would take someone using software that's available, for a couple of dollars on the dark web, 29 hundredths of a millisecond to crack a 7-letter lowercase password. Just by adding 5 letters to go from 7 letters to 12 letters, you take the amount of time it would take an algorithm to crack that password from 29 hundredths of a millisecond up to 2 centuries, right? So you look at it, this is no different than having the security system in your home, or even the sign on your front lawn that says this house is protected by ADT. You want deterrence in place, okay? And so just having the policy that says, passwords must be no less than 12 characters in length, you are putting procedures in place that are going to make it not impossible, but very difficult for the bad guys to crack passwords on your network, on your devices, such that you're making them look elsewhere to try to gain access. Again, the more complex we make passwords, the harder they become to crack. Just adding the letter or the word password, all lowercase, if we just add a capital P, you take the amount of, you increase, or rather it takes the amount of time it would take lightning to strike 2 to 3 times to crack password with a capital P. You add, an ampersand for the A, a 0 for the O, and another capital letter. You increase that to 14 years. So when you combine the length of the password with the complexity of the password, you start to put together a picture of deterrence, passwords that become difficult to crack. Are your employees reusing passwords on multiple devices for multiple accounts? Do they have the same password for your network computer in your office as they do for their PC at home? Is their Facebook password the same as their Gmail password, the same as your Outlook or Exchange password to log into your email in your at your workplace? The reason why that is not a bad practice, not a good practice, is because when one account is hacked, right? When account credentials are stolen from one account, if passwords are reused, all the bad guys got to do is take that password and start plugging it in to random sites all over the internet to see if that password is reused. So if somebody gets a password on one site, if Facebook is hacked and your password is stolen on Facebook, and you reuse that password on Gmail, on your Exchange server, on your network, on your whatever, if that password is reused, you're then giving that person access to every account that you have on the internet just by virtue of reusing that password. From a best practices standpoint, I recommend to my clients that they invest in things like password managers. Software that generates random passwords of various length and various complexity, numbers, letters, ASCII characters, and what have you, that are randomly generated for every site and then stored somewhere so that when you're in your browser, it's a master password that unlocks passwords for all accounts that someone has. The other options that employees use are things like leaving passwords on sticky notes or notepads on their desk, or reusing passwords for multiple accounts so they don't forget passwords. For various reasons, they're all not great practices to have because of the risk of theft or reuse of passwords and what have you. So what I recommend to my clients is password managers to generate random passwords, different passwords for each site that they use, remotely, securely stored, and then able to access through either apps on your phone or extensions on browsers or what have you. The ability to remote wipe a device, and do employees know what to do if a device is lost or stolen? Remote wipe technology solution, if a device is lost or stolen, do you have the technology in place to wipe that device remotely? Do your employees know what to do if a device is lost or stolen? If the device is password protected, sufficiently likely the data on that device is going to be encrypted. But regardless, A, if the device is not password protected, or B, if weak or insecure passwords or what have you, you need to have the ability to remote wipe a device, and your employees need to know what to do when that device is lost or stolen. Do your employees know, for example, if they lose their iPhone, right? They leave it on the counter at Starbucks and walk out of Starbucks without it, and then an hour later they remember, they go back to Starbucks, the device is gone. If your employees' first call is to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whomever their mobile carrier is, and the carrier shuts off that device remotely on the carrier side, your IT department might lose the ability to remote wipe that device because that device is now off the grid once the carrier turns it off on their side. Your employees need to understand that their first call when a device is lost or stolen should not be to their carrier, but should be to your IT department or to your IT vendor or provider, so that they, from whatever mobile device management solution they're using, can wipe the device on their end before the employee goes and takes care of making sure that things are handled from their carrier's perspective. Open Wi-Fi, another huge security risk that employees don't understand the risk of, and B, because they don't understand the risk, are using it all the time. We are always looking for ways, right, to save on data costs, right? For example, we are looking for, I don't want to use up the data plan on my phone. For those of us that have, for example, bring your own device, you're connecting your own device onto your company's network. I'm going to connect my device onto whatever Wi-Fi I find and use their data, not my own. Or I'm on the road, I'm traveling, I'm going to duck into a Starbucks and get network access for an hour to use their Wi-Fi or what have you. I'm going to play a quick video which is going to illustrate the danger, and it's got sound, so hopefully this will work.
Inside Terminal 5 at the Los Angeles International Airport, dozens of people are. Gregory Evans is a former hacker. His resume includes 2 years in federal prison.
Where's it come from? Yeah.
Operations in the world. We set up in a corner of the terminal so that Evans, who now owns a cybersecurity company, could show us just how vulnerable people are to hackers.
I will go and set up a fake Wi-Fi and watch everybody connect to it. And once they connect to it and they start surfing the internet, now what I'll do is just grab all their traffic.
We launched a fake network named LAX Free Wi-Fi. Within minutes, people started connecting to it. Evans then showed us how a hacker can record everything off a computer that joined our network by tracking what I was doing on my laptop.
So if they go to their bank, it'll grab all their banking information. If they go to their Facebook, it'll grab all that. Their Twitter accounts, if they're writing love letters, I can grab all of that.
Or, Evans says even worse, if a hacker has enough time, spyware can be installed, which stays with the victim.
You get on the plane, you go to one country, I go to another. But everything that you do, as long as you have that computer, is going to be emailed back to me.
All right, so that's how simple it is for someone to, via an open Wi-Fi network, to poach or steal information that's on someone's device. They can, through that open Wi-Fi network, can actively monitor what's going on, can actively, take information, or can, through that network, remotely install, malware and other monitoring software to gain continual access to that device, and people fall for it. People don't understand the risk associated with that. When the RNC was here 2 years ago, a local tech company set up a test out on the courtyard outside the queue. They, for an hour, set up open Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi networks with names like Google Starbucks or Trump for president or don't vote Hillary 2016 to try to lure people to log on to those Wi-Fi networks. They took a general, set it up for an hour, these open Wi-Fi networks with these alluring names, and in that hour, more than 1,300 people in that area logged onto those various public open Wi-Fi networks. And again, this was a test. They weren't there to do any harm. They were just there to prove a point. But the point they proved was that people don't understand that when a Wi-Fi network is called Google Starbucks, that it may not be Google Starbucks. When you set up a Wi-Fi network, you can call it whatever you want to call it, right? You can call it Google Starbucks. You can call it Trump for president. You can call it Don't Vote for Hillary. You can call it whatever. But the bad guys, the cyber criminals that are looking to get people to log into those networks so they can do what you saw done in that video, are playing on people's need to be connected 24/7, people's need to have Wi-Fi where they might not otherwise have data available to them. And once they get on those networks, right, we saw in the quick video clip what these cyber criminals can do. So your employees need to understand the risk associated with these open Wi-Fi networks. And really, the best practices here are twofold. Number one, your employees should not be on these networks, number one. And number two, if they need access mobily, either, number one, provide them with secure hotspots that they can use, or number two, give them VPNs, virtual private networks, that they can use to log on to your network, which adds the security necessary for even if they are in a Starbucks or in a DoubleTree or out in public where there might be just a publicly available AT&T or Time Warner network or whatever, allows them to securely log onto your network even through these otherwise insecure open Wi-Fi. Ryan talked during his talk about phishing, gave you some examples, a really good example of a phishing email. The reason why people, right, the bad guys, the cyber criminals, still send phishing emails is because they work, right? If they didn't work, people wouldn't send them, right? And so your employees need to understand what to look for when they are presented with an email that might be a phishing attack. Do they understand that, Amazon probably isn't going to send you an email from management at mazoncanada.ca, right? Does the email address of the sender match the person's expectation of who's going to be sending the email? Is it a generically, is the greeting generic, or is it personalized to you, the recipient? Do your employees understand that you can call a URL anything you want to call it, and that the title of the URL, right, that you see in on a web page or in an email or in a document doesn't necessarily match where that's going to go if you click on it? Do they understand that you can hover over a URL with the pointer on your mouse to see where that URL is going to redirect to? Or on a mobile device, what I do, if I'm presented with something that I think might be an attempt to phish me, either in a text message or a mobile email or even on a web page, I'll hover over the URL, I'll copy the hyperlink, and then I'll paste it into the Notes app on my device to see whether or not where that URL is going to take me matches what the URL is called in the email, and or the text, and that's one way to tell: am I being phished, or is this legitimate? Is that really going to take me to Amazon.com to sign into my Amazon account, or is it going to take me to redirect.whatever that is.com, which I promise you is a URL that you don't want to go to? Employees have gotten, again, these things work, so they're used, but employees have gotten, they're not great, but they have gotten better at recognizing an email like this for what it is. So what the bad guys have done has started using social engineering to create better, more targeted phishing attempts to lure people. What they want to do, they want you to click on that attachment or click on that link because that's what's going to install the malware, that's what's going to install the ransomware. And they've gotten better and better at doing that. Or people have gotten better at recognizing it. So what the cyber criminals have done have gotten better at disguising the emails, disguising the phishing attempts through social engineering. We all, right? How many people are on Facebook? How many are on LinkedIn? How many are on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder? Okay. We share a tremendous amount of information about ourselves online. Some of it on Facebook and can be locked down through privacy settings, but a lot of it is out there for public consumption. And the cyber criminals are using this publicly available information to build social profiles about us and are sending much more targeted emails to get us to click that link and install the bad stuff on our computers, on our systems. This is an example of one of these more complex phishing attempts. It is someone, a cyber criminal who has, through social engineering, specifically targeting people in the Microsoft security group on LinkedIn, and has determined that people who belong to the Microsoft security group on LinkedIn might be more likely to click the link that is going to connect them to the guru of Microsoft, Bill Gates himself, than they would on just a generic, dear customer or dear client phishing email. So you have, this looks like, if you've ever received an invitation to a connection on LinkedIn, this is what the email looks like, exactly what it looks like, what you're going to get from LinkedIn. Bill Gates has indicated you're a fellow group member of Microsoft Security. I'd like to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn, B. Gates, right? And who, if you belong to the Microsoft Security network, why would you not want to be, or group, why would you not want to be connected on LinkedIn to Bill Gates? And so very tempting for someone to click on that link. As soon as you click on that link, however, you're not going to become LinkedIn best buddies with Bill Gates. You're going to install whatever malware or ransomware this particular cyber criminal wants to install on your computer, on your servers, or what have you. So again, your employees need to be trained to recognize these emails for what they are, because these types of things are what is going to cause the breaches to happen more often than not. Which leads us to the second piece I want to talk about, which is, what is your cyber action plan? What are you doing from a preventative standpoint before a breach happens, and then after a breach happens to respond to that breach? A lot of information I'm going to run through in a very short amount of time. This is not meant to be, by any stretch of the imagination, a detailed, step-by-step, everything you need to do to plan for and remedy a breach. Plan for a breach before it happens and remedy a breach after it happens. Very high-level picture of the types of issues you should be thinking about within your organizations before the breach and then after the breach. Do you have a data breach response policy, right? Do you know what you're going to do when a breach occurs before the breach happens? Because when the breach happens, as we talked about before, right, the bad guys have been on your network for, 254 days? Was that the number? Right? 284. All right. They've been on your network for a long time, right? And under the law, you only have a certain amount of time to respond once you learn of the breach, right? To notify those people who have had information stolen of that you've been breached, right? Depending on the state, it might be 30 days, it might be 45 days, it might be 60 days, but it's a short amount of time to respond. And the longer it takes you to respond, the more damage is going to be done, the more information is going to be exposed, the the more it's going to cost to remedy the breach, right? And so knowing what you're going to do before it happens is the best thing you can do to quickly, to as quickly as possible respond to the breach, right? So do you know what states you operate in and what those states' data breach notification requirements are? Do you know what you're going to do? Who's going to be on the incident response team? How often are you reviewing the policy to make sure it's up to date with current legal requirements and best practices? What kind of reviews do you do of your information systems and other data for PII, personally identifiable information, right? The private stuff that people want to get, the social security numbers, the medical records, whatever information, credit card numbers, financial information, right? Not just, when we think of data breaches, we think of, well, I don't work in the financial sector, I don't work in the medical sector, I'm a small manufacturer, what do I have to worry about? As it was mentioned before, right, Target was breached not through Target, but through its HVAC vendor, right? So people might try to breach you because they want to get access to someone bigger that you do business with, or you may be a small manufacturer of widgets that someone in China wants to get access to whatever information you store on your server so they can reverse engineer what you make so they can flood the market with cheap knockoffs of your product. Or even though you're not a financial institution, you may have customer credit card information that you store. Or even though you are not a medical provider, you may store employee medical information relative to their medical insurance applications and benefits and what have you. So just because don't work or don't operate in the medical sphere or the financial sphere doesn't mean there is not information that you want to get, and you need to know, right, where you're storing those things, right? What is your risk and threat assessment for access to your information? Who has access to PII, right? Who has access to that information and how are they accessing it? What types of security controls do you have in place and how long are you keeping data for? Are you reviewing and updating your data destruction policies? Do you know how long you're storing your information for, and are you appropriately and properly destroying information, getting rid of, purging information that you no longer need to have? Are you monitoring your PII and other data for leakage and loss? Right? What types of tools do you have to track what data it might be flowing out of your network? Right? Part of the reason why it took Target so long to identify the fact that they were breached is because they really weren't monitoring what information was going out of their network. It wasn't until a large volume of information was leaked out that someone finally discovered that information through the Target breach was flowing out of their network through the breach. If you are not doing things to actively monitor on the technology side what information might be flowing out of your network, or maybe where are there inappropriate access to your network from unexpected places, right? Do you see access to your network from China when you don't have any business dealings in China, for example? If you're not monitoring these things, you may not know that data is flowing out of your network to places that it should not be going. Are you, as we talked about earlier, what type of privacy and security awareness training are you providing to your employees? What types of things are you requiring your vendors or customers to subscribe to as a condition of doing business with you? The people that have hands-on or eyes on your data, what type of training are you requiring them to undergo? What types of policies, procedures, protocols do you have in place? And what training are you providing such that your people understand what is required of them from a privacy and data data handling standpoint. Okay, you've been hacked. What do you do, right? What do you do to respond to the breach? Let me give you an example of what not to do, and then we'll talk about what to do. Anybody have an Uber account? Anybody use Uber? Do you know that Uber was breached in 2016? 57 million user accounts were breached. Logins, passwords, credit card information, all taken out of Uber. What did Uber do to respond to the breach? They didn't immediately notify their customers. They didn't follow data breach laws for any of the states in which they operate. What Uber did was Uber located the two people that had hacked into the Uber network, the two criminals that had hacked into their network and stolen the 57 million customer accounts, and they essentially put them on their payroll. Uber said, essentially we're creating a program where we're going to hire you to, for $100,000, we're going to hire you to attempt to hack into our system and tell us where our weak points are. So they essentially turned the criminals into employees, right? Think about whether you want those kind of people working for you. Number one, not that you shouldn't be doing things like penetration testing and security testing and all those things to test the validity of your network and your security, but you should be doing it through legitimate IT providers, legitimate vendors, not the criminals that broke into your network and stole 57 million customer accounts. And so, when you're hacked, don't do what Uber did. Don't put the criminals on your payroll. What you should be doing is following a series of steps to shore up the breach, shore up your systems, figure out what's been missing, where the access was, and then notify as appropriate under the law. First thing you got to do when you suspect that there's been a breach is you have to validate that the breach even occurred. Don't assume that every incident that you become aware of has been a breach of PII or other company data. You need to kind of get in and you have to dig through the data, dig through your systems to determine whether or not a breach has actually occurred. And if you determine that a breach has occurred, where did the breach happen? What information was disclosed? And how was that information disclosed through your network? Now, you should have, because we've done the planning before, you should have your data breach response team already in place and ready to be deployed. So you're now going to have to figure out who's going to run your breach response. You're going to have to start documenting what is being done in terms of responding to that breach, and you want to coordinate the flow of information and manage the public messaging about the breach. There is a time and a place for public dissemination of information about a breach. Once you've been breached, 48 of the 50 states have specific laws that say when, where, and how you notify those impacted by the breach about the breach. Part of what you want to do here is manage not just the flow of information to those people impacted, but also the reputational harm that could come from the breach itself. So to manage the public flow of information about the fact that you've been breached, to manage whatever reputational harm your organization may suffer as a result about the breach. And now you're going to deploy your incident response team, which is, should already be there and ready to go, but cuts across many aspects of an organization. It's not just IT, legal, public affairs and public relations, risk management, finance, audit, and then if you suspect an internal incident or something, a malicious employee, HR, what's the status of the breach? Is it past, ongoing, or has it ended? If it's ongoing, What can you do to immediately prevent further data loss? What have you done to mitigate against, what have you done to mitigate the breach? And then again, the confidential piece, advise your staff to keep the breach details in confidence until they're notified. Otherwise, again, managing the messaging. What's the scope of the breach? How broad or how deep is the breach? Do you suspect criminal activity? And if so, should you be notifying law enforcement? Have you identified all affected data, machines, and devices? Have you conducted interviews with key personnel and documented facts that have come out that maybe led to the cause of the breach? Have you taken appropriate steps to preserve evidence for later forensic analysis to determine exactly how the breach occurred and what was leaked? And then in terms of that evidence preservation, are you doing things like preserving logs, server logs, et cetera, applicable to the breach for later examination? Specific to the issue of law enforcement, when your breach occurs, you should be consulting with your counsel. But one of the things that your counsel should be talking to you about is whether or not you need to notify the authorities, which should be, if you believe a crime has been committed, number one, or number two, if your particular state data breach notification law requires that law enforcement be notified. And again, there are 48 different laws across 50 states, and you need to know what law applies or what laws apply based on the states in which potential data was lost or stolen. What does your state law say about how, when, and where to notify the owners of the data, right? The individuals of whose PII might have been leaked or stolen. Your state law is going to dictate how, when, how and when that notification is going to take place. You want to make sure that the people investigating the breach are doing it in a forensically appropriate manner, such that evidence you are preserving and not destroying evidence that you may need later on, whether it's to provide to the authorities or because you're engaged in litigation down the road as a result of the breach. Are you doing this in-house or through an outside vendor? Are you talking to your legal counsel and IT about what you should be doing to protect whatever digital evidence there is? If law enforcement is involved, are you coordinating with them rather than conflicting with them so that you're not stepping on their toes in their investigation? What are you doing to safely and appropriately store the evidence that's discovered? And then what are you doing in terms of clearly compromised machines, devices, and what have you? Are you disposing of them? Are you wiping them and rebuilding them? Is your data appropriately backed up so that you can restore if necessary? Again, what are your notification obligations? Again, state law will dictate. A couple things to think about when you are making the decision of how to notify and to whom to notify. You want to be straight up and honest with people. You don't want to be, and this is where things like PR and media relations will come into play. You don't want to be evasive or incomplete in what you are telling people in terms of what happened. Are you going to, like Equifax did, although they didn't handle it great initially, provide credit monitoring or identity theft protection to mitigate the risk of negative consequences to those people impacted by the breach? You want to work, this is really where you want to work closely with your media relations or PR folks to craft the message that's, number one, going to the people impacted, but that number two, that goes out to the media. And you want to make sure that those people that are impacted by the data breach will learn about it before the media does. You want you want to control the messaging. And if somebody has had their PII stolen as a result of your data breach, you want to make sure that they hear it from you and not from, the plain dealer or from the local news station. And then what do you do from a planning perspective moving forward, right? What caused the breach? What can we do from a planning perspective to make sure that that breach, that incident doesn't happen again in the future? You want to not just look at what caused the breach to mitigate against that particular or breach incident happening in the future, but then you want to audit your response as well. What did we do well in discovering the breach, responding to the breach, and what can we do better? What can we do better next time? What improvements can we make to our incident response team, our incident response handling, our auditing, our looking at our systems and whatnot to do things better the next time, if and when there is a next time. And then what are we doing with our people from an information security and training standpoint to help prevent or mitigate against future breaches from occurring? Again, as I said at the outset, data breaches are not an if proposition, but a when proposition. Your organization will be breached at some point. The likely cause of that breach will be your people. The question that you have to answer as you leave here today and take all this information back to your organizations is, what are we doing well with our people so that they understand these risks? What can we be doing better with our people so they understand them better? And then what are we doing organizationally to prepare ourselves, to put ourselves in the best position possible to react and respond to the breach, not if it happens, but when it happens. So thank you all for your time this morning. I think we are now slotted for a short, 15-minute break?